Well, hey guys, Thoughts on Walks returns in the pandemic era. I wanted to take a couple minutes today to talk about something that I've been thinking about a bunch, particularly ever since Endgame ended, but even more so since. And that is, even when movies get back up and running again, and we're back up to full speed, I think there are 6 specific challenges that the MCU is going to face. I think the first challenge that the MCU is going to face is actually something that every movie is going to face and every studio is going to face, not just the MCU, not just Disney, but that's the pandemic itself. It's going to be movie-going atrophy. If you're bedridden for a long time, you get muscle atrophy, right? It's just what happens. I think the whole habit, going to the movies is a habit. And when you don't go to the movies for a really long time, it takes a little bit to get back into that habit again. And I think even once the pandemic is done, even once the worst of it's behind us, I think the MCU, and really, again, this applies to all movies, this one, but it's going to face the reality that it's going to take a little while for the public to get back into the habit of going to the movies again. So movie-going atrophy is going to be challenge number 1. Now, challenge number 2 is very specific to the MCU, as the rest of them will be, but challenge number 2 is this. They've lost their 2 biggest and most popular characters. I mean, for the most part, when you look at the entire 10-plus year history of the MCU, while there are a lot of characters and a lot of stories, really, if you want to boil it down, the MCU is the story of Captain America and Iron Man. And as of the end of Endgame, their 2 most popular characters are gone. But let's be honest here. We all know that Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. will both be back in the MCU in a couple of years. Just take that to the bank. They're both such important characters that as you chart through the MCU, you really see they're always highlighted. Whether you're looking at Avengers posters, whether you're looking at Civil War, that ultimately was Captain America versus Iron Man. There's a ton of other characters, but really Civil War is about Captain America versus Iron Man. It's so important to them that even when you came to Spider-Man Homecoming, the first Spider-Man film, just knowing that Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man was going to be in it, it made a lot of people worry, including me, that Spider-Man was going to be completely overshadowed in his own movie. That's how key and important Iron Man was. That's how key and important Captain America is. And that is going to be a big challenge they face moving forward. The 2 main faces of the MCU are no longer there. Now that brings us to challenge number 3, and it's sort of associated with challenge number 2. If challenge number 2 is going to be the fact that the 2 main characters, their 2 biggest featured characters of the MCU are now gone, then you've got to talk about the fact that, their 2 main actors are gone. And unfortunately, when I started kind of thinking out this whole 5 challenges or 6 challenges now of the MCU faces, Chadwick Boseman was still with us. And unfortunately, he's not anymore. So really, you're looking at 3 of the biggest stars of the MCU are no longer with us. Because yes, on camera, Captain America and Iron Man were the biggest draws there, but off camera, you cannot underestimate how important Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. as individuals were to the whole MCU. Their celebrity and their ability to promote these films and for fans to get excited, particularly about Robert Downey Jr. People love Robert Downey Jr. Their inability now to utilize these characters to come and promote these films, to be the off-camera face of these films. If Captain America and Iron Man were their on-camera faces, then the off-camera faces were Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. On top of that, add the most exciting new character we had in the MCU, the most exciting new star of the MCU, obviously Chadwick Boseman, not there as well. That is going to be something that's going to pose a problem to the MCU moving forward. Here's challenge number 4 they're going to face. And I already know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with this, but hear me out. The novelty of the shared cinematic universe is gone. I remember when they first introduced, Iron Man, and then Nick Fury shows up at the end, say we're forming the Avengers Initiative, and then you're going to see heroes on screen together, and then the first Avengers come out, and you're seeing all the Avengers standing in a circle, and everybody's excited, and that they kept building that. You got into Civil War with even more heroes together. Then you got into Infinity War and Endgame with all of these heroes together. We never thought, at least a lot of us never thought, that we would see that many A-list characters all together on the screen at the same time doing superhero stuff. It was incredible, and it was novel. There's a novelty to it, and novelty isn't a bad thing. Novelty can be very good and a very powerful thing, but there's definitely a novelty to that. But we now live in a world, a post-Avengers Endgame world. We now live in a world where that novelty is no longer, powerful. We've seen it before. We've been there. We've done that. We've seen the 2 heroes together. We've seen the 5 heroes together. Hell, we've seen the 40 heroes together. That's not to say that these still aren't great things and these aren't things that people will still get excited about, but that extra novel power of it, like this is something we've never seen before. Well, we've seen it before. The MCU and Kevin Feige moving forward are going to need to find ways to replace that kind of energy that got generated simply from the novelty of seeing all these characters together. Okay, challenge number 5 that the MCU is going to face, and that is growing, stiffer competition coming from Warner Brothers and DC and Sony. Listen, all these companies celebrate when the other does well because it raises up the expectation level, it raises the excitement level, it raises the fandom for the comic book genre in general. But still, there's only so much money to go around. Fact of the matter is, Warner Brothers has really got itself in a much better place than it used to be, say, 5 years ago. As a matter of fact, I recently did a video talking about why I feel, I'm not saying Warner Brothers is better than the MCU, but I made a video recently just basically explaining why I believe that Warner Brothers is actually even better positioned for success right now than even the MCU. And when you look at Sony, well, frankly, I know a lot of people kind of grimace when they hear the word Sony, but for my money, they've been killing it lately. Venom was an $800 million hit that everybody said would never work in a million years without Spider-Man. Guess what? It did. Then they made one of the best comic book movies in years, not just animated, but in general. They made one of the best comic book movies in years with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And now we've got trailers for Morbius, and that looks fantastic, and everybody's getting really excited. Sony's now a legitimate player. And now there's even talks about them merging in the Sony Spider-Verse or Spunk in with the MCU. That could create some interesting dynamics there too. But overall, they're now facing stiffer competition today than they were a couple of years ago, and that really could play a factor. The 6th and final challenge that I'll talk about here right now that I believe the MCU is going to face moving forward is, and we've been talking about this ever since Endgame came out, Endgame hangover. I saw somebody the other day actually put it really beautifully. They said, I just don't know that I feel as excited about the MCU anymore. And this is somebody who's been a really, really major MCU fan. And said, I just don't know that I'm going to feel as excited about the MCU anymore because it kind of feels like the ending of Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings ends, they said, when, the good guys win, it's all done. But then they had like 5 other endings after that. Personally, I love every single second of Lord of the Rings Return of the King right up to the last moment. But it's true, we've had this 10+ year buildup with 20+ movies all arcing towards one big monumental event, and then they did it. They hit the crescendo, and they hit it really well. And it was exciting, it was fun, it broke box office records and all that kind of stuff. But what happened after that? Well, we had Spider-Man Far From Home come after that, a movie that I think is actually quite good. I enjoyed Spider-Man Far From Home a lot. But the reality is, not a lot of people talk about Spider-Man Far From Home anymore. As a matter of fact, when people do talk about Spider-Man Far From Home, they're usually talking about J.K. Simmons' cameo in the end credits. And, well, call me silly, but it's not a good sign when the thing that everybody's talking most about, your movie, is a post-credit cameo by a character who played the same role in another iteration of the movies. Now look, I'm not saying what some other people have said, which is that Endgame actually killed the MCU, but there is something there. The fact that they went through this entire journey, 10 years of building up to something, and then you got there, and then you had your climax, metaphorically speaking. And, we even saw just in the days and weeks and months after Endgame, there was a lot of excitement about the movie, but everybody's excitement about the MCU in general just tempered a little bit more. And you see that too with MCU news that comes out ever since Endgame debuted. Whenever any MCU news would come out before Endgame, the smallest bit of news would get everybody salivating and going crazy. The fact of the matter is, and I'm sure the pandemic has something to do with this too, I'm not ignoring that, but MCU new sizzle comes out or a new trailer, and you just don't see the type of excitement or the level of awareness that you used to get before. As a matter of fact, WandaVision just dropped a terrific trailer the other day, and it didn't get anywhere near the amount of buzz and excitement and hype that it would have gotten had that come out before Avengers Endgame. Again, I'm not saying the MCU is dead because of Endgame. I'm just saying, that Endgame hangover is a real thing they're going to have to deal with. Look, the MCU is going to continue to be big. The MCU is going to continue to be successful. And yes, when this pandemic's over, the MCU is going to continue to make money. However, I'm just saying that Kevin Feige, in all of his genius, is going to have to account for and strategize for overcoming these very real challenges that they have. Anyway, guys, that'll do it for this return to Thoughts on Walks. Let me know what you think about those challenges. How do you see the MCU overcoming those 6 challenges that I mentioned? And can you think of other challenges they're facing that maybe I didn't think of right now? Jump into the comments below and let me know your thoughts. That'll do it for me, guys. Thanks for being here. My name's John Campea. Bye-bye.